The scalpel trembled in Dr. Esperanza Morales' hand as she stared at the MRI scan glowing on her phone screen. The 7-year-old boy she'd been hired to clean up after had a brain tumor the size of a marble pressing against his speech center. In 6 months, maybe less, little Luca Salvatore would be dead. And his father, the most dangerous man in New York, had no idea his son was dying while he counted blood money in the room above. Esperanza closed her eyes, remembering the last time she'd held a scalpel. The last time she'd tried to save a child caught in the crossfire of the Mafia world. That surgery had cost her everything: her medical license, her reputation, her life in Mexico. Now, as she watched Luca obsessively drawing the same spiraling patterns that indicated severe neurological pressure, she faced an impossible choice: stay silent and watch an innocent child die, or reveal her true identity to the man whose world had already destroyed her once. The sound of Dante Salvatore's footsteps echoed down the marble hallway. Time was running out. For all of them. The Salvatore mansion loomed against the grey Manhattan sky like a fortress built from old money and fresh blood. Esperanza Morales clutched her worn duffel bag tighter as she approached the imposing front entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. 6 months in New York, and this was her last chance. 3 cleaning jobs barely covered rent in her cramped Queens apartment, and her visa would expire in 90 days. She needed this job, even if it meant working for the devil himself. "You're the new maid." The voice cut through the morning air like broken glass. Esperanza turned to face a man who seemed carved from marble and shadows. Dante Salvatore stood in the doorway, his presence commanding the space around him effortlessly. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, if Renaissance artists had painted men who could kill with their bare hands. His white dress shirt hung open at the collar, the top 4 buttons undone, revealing a muscular chest and the edge of an intricate pointillism tattoo creeping up the side of his neck. K. Platinum Patek Philippe caught the light on his wrist as he crossed his arms. Yes, sir." Esperanza forced herself to meet his intense brown eyes, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. "I'm Esperanza Morales." His gaze swept over her like a scanner, cataloging every detail: cheap jeans, faded sweater, scuffed shoes. She could practically see him calculating her worth and finding it lacking. "You speak English?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, and Spanish. A little Italian." The last part slipped out before she could stop it. Dangerous. She couldn't let him know how much Italian she actually understood. Something flickered in his dark eyes. "The agency said you have experience with difficult children." Esperanza's chest tightened. If only he knew exactly how much experience she had with children. "I do. My son." Dante's jaw clenched, and for a moment the dangerous mask slipped, revealing something raw underneath. "He doesn't speak. Hasn't said a word in 2 years. The previous maids couldn't handle him." "How many previous maids?" 12. The number hit her like a physical blow. 12 women had tried and failed to connect with this child. 12 women had walked away from whatever darkness lived in this house. "What happened 2 years ago?" she asked softly. Dante's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind cold steel. "That's not your concern. Your job is to clean, cook, and stay out of my son's way when he has his episodes." Episodes. The clinical term made her stomach twist. In her medical training, she'd learned that children didn't have episodes without reason. Trauma, neurological issues, developmental disorders. There was always a cause. "I'd like to meet him," she said. "No." Dante's voice brooked no argument. "Luca doesn't meet new people. You'll clean around him. He'll ignore you. Everyone's happier that way." Before Esperanza could respond, a crash echoed from somewhere deep in the house, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Dante's shoulders tensed, but he didn't move. "Shouldn't we—" "No." He pulled out his phone, checking the time with practiced indifference. "He'll stop eventually, he always does." Another crash, this one louder. Esperanza's medical training kicked in before her common sense could stop her. What if he's hurt? He's not hurt, he's angry. Dante's fingers tightened around his phone. The last maid tried to help during one of these fits. She lasted 3 hours. The crashes continued, rhythmic now like a heartbeat made of destruction. Esperanza could picture it. A small boy, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't express, taking apart his world piece by piece because it was the only control he had left. "Mr. Salvatore," she said carefully, "I've worked with traumatized children before. Sometimes they—" "You've worked with traumatized children?" His laugh was bitter. "Lady, you have no idea what trauma looks like." "If only you knew," she thought. "If only you knew that I've held dying children in my hands, that I've watched parents collapse when I couldn't save their babies, that I lost everything trying to save a little girl whose father made the same choices you do." "Perhaps not," she said aloud. "But I know that isolation doesn't heal anything." The crashes stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. Dante studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "Your room is on the 3rd floor. Mrs. Chen will show you around. She handles the cooking. You handle everything else. Luca's room is off limits unless you're cleaning it, and only when he's not there." "When would that be?" "He's never not there." Dante turned toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. If you last longer than a week, I'll double your salary. If you last a month," he shrugged, "we'll see." As he walked away, Esperanza caught sight of the full tattoo on his neck. An intricate pointillism rose, each dot perfectly placed to create something beautiful from a distance, chaotic up close, like the man himself. The sound of footsteps on marble faded, leaving her alone in the cavernous entryway. Somewhere above, a child was suffering in silence, and his father was too proud or too broken to see it. Esperanza closed her eyes and felt the phantom weight of a scalpel in her hand. She'd sworn never to practice medicine again after what happened in Guadalajara, but as she stood in this house, built on violence and secrets, listening to the echo of a child's pain, she wondered if some oaths were meant to be broken, especially when a life hung in the balance. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 times, each note reverberating through the marble halls like a countdown. 90 days until her visa expired. One little boy who might not have 90 days left, and a dangerous man who would probably kill her if he knew the truth. Esperanza picked up her bag and headed for the stairs. She had work to do. Esperanza's first week in the Salvatore mansion passed like walking through a minefield. She learned the rhythm of the house. Dante left before dawn for business meetings that made grown men nervous, returned after midnight smelling like expensive cologne and danger. Mrs. Chen, the elderly cook, spoke only when necessary and avoided eye contact. The other staff, a driver, 2 security guards and a groundskeeper, treated her like she was invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it, because being invisible meant she could observe, and what she observed made her blood run cold. Luca Salvatore was dying and nobody knew it. The signs were subtle but unmistakable to someone with her training. The way he held his head when he thought no one was looking, pressing his small palm against his left temple, the occasional stumble when he walked, quickly corrected. The obsessive drawing, always the same spiraling patterns that indicated severe intracranial pressure, and the silence. God, the silence. She'd been cleaning the library when she first saw him, a small figure hunched over a massive oak desk, dark hair falling across his face as he drew with fierce concentration. He looked like a miniature version of his father. The same sharp jawline, the same intense focus, but where Dante's eyes held calculated coldness, Luca's held something far more heartbreaking: fear. "Buongiorno, Luca," she'd whispered in Italian, testing. His pencil had stopped moving for exactly 3 seconds. Then he'd continued drawing as if she didn't exist. But those 3 seconds told her everything. He understood. He just couldn't or wouldn't respond. Now, on her 8th day, Esperanza found herself outside Luca's room with a stack of fresh linens and a plan that could get her killed. Through the crack in the door, she could see him at his desk again, surrounded by hundreds of drawings, the same spiraling patterns, over and over, like his brain was trying to map its own destruction. She knocked softly. "Luca, I need to change your sheets." No response. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a 7-year-old's paradise turned prison. Expensive toys sat untouched on shelves. A massive flat-screen TV remained dark, video games still in their packaging. But the desk was covered in art supplies and paper, evidence of a mind desperately trying to communicate. Luca didn't look up as she moved around the room, changing pillowcases and straightening furniture. But she could feel his awareness of her presence, the way his shoulders tensed when she came too close. "You're very talented," she said softly in English, glancing at his current drawing. The spiral was more complex today, with smaller patterns branching off like neural pathways, like a brain scan. His pencil paused again. Esperanza's heart raced. In her medical bag, hidden in her room, she had a portable ophthalmoscope. If she could just examine his eyes, check for papilledema, swelling of the optic nerve that would confirm increased intracranial pressure. "Muéstrame tu dibujo," she said suddenly in Spanish. "Show me your drawing." Luca's head snapped up for the first time, dark eyes wide with surprise. For a moment they stared at each other across the room, a broken child and a woman carrying secrets that could save or damn them both. Then, slowly, Luca turned the paper toward her. Esperanza's breath caught. It wasn't just a spiral. It was anatomically perfect representation of a brain, complete with ventricles and neural pathways. No 7-year-old should be able to draw with this level of detail unless he was drawing what he felt inside his own head. "It's beautiful," she whispered, moving closer. "But it looks crowded, like there's not enough space." Luca's eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. He pointed to a dark spot in the drawing, then pressed his palm against the same location on his own head. "Does it hurt there?" she asked gently. A tiny nod, the first communication he'd made in 2 years. Esperanza knelt beside his chair, her medical training warring with her need to stay hidden. "Luca, I want to help you, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Another nod, smaller this time. "I'm going to touch your head very gently, okay? Just to see if I can help with the pain." She placed her fingers against his temples, feeling for signs of increased pressure. His skull felt warm, slightly swollen. When she pressed gently behind his left ear, he winced. Classic symptoms. Textbook presentation. The tumor was growing. "Luca," she whispered, "how long has your head been hurting?" He held up 2 fingers. 2 years. Since his mother died. Since he stopped speaking. "And the drawings? When did you start drawing these patterns?" He pointed to a calendar on his wall, then held up 6 fingers. 6 months ago. Right around the time the tumor would have started affecting his speech center, Esperanza's hands shook as she stood. This child needed surgery. Soon. But revealing what she knew would expose her identity, her past, everything she'd worked to hide. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Heavy, purposeful steps that could only belong to one person. "Hide the drawing," she whispered urgently. Luca quickly shoved the paper into his desk drawer just as Dante appeared in the doorway. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in the scene. His son at his desk, the new maid standing nearby with fresh linens. "Is there a problem?" His voice carried the weight of barely controlled violence. "No problem, Mr. Salvatore. Just changing the sheets." Esperanza forced her voice to remain steady. Dante's gaze shifted to his son. "Luca, has she been bothering you?" Luca looked up at his father, then at Esperanza. For a moment, she thought he might speak, might break his 2-year silence to defend her. Instead, he shook his head once and returned to his drawing. "Good." Dante's attention returned to her. "When you're finished here, I need to speak with you in my office." Esperanza's blood turned to ice. "Of course, sir." As Dante walked away, she caught Luca's eye one more time. He was watching her with an intensity that reminded her painfully of his father. But where Dante's gaze held suspicion, Luca's held something else. Hope. She finished her work quickly, her mind racing. In her room, hidden beneath loose floorboards, was her medical bag with everything she needed to confirm her diagnosis. But using it would mean crossing a line she'd sworn never to cross again. The last time she'd tried to save a child from the Mafia world, it had cost her everything. But as she headed toward Dante's office, one thought echoed in her mind. Luca Salvatore was running out of time, and she might be the only person who could save him. Dante's office occupied the entire top floor of the mansion, a testament to power built on blood and fear. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Central Park, while dark mahogany furniture and leather-bound books created an atmosphere of old-world authority. But Esperanza's attention was drawn to the massive oil painting behind his desk. A beautiful woman with kind eyes and Luca's smile, his mother. "Sit," Dante commanded without looking up from the papers scattered across his desk. His white dress shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscled forearms marked with small scars. The pointillism rose tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse in the lamplight as he worked. Esperanza perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands folded to hide their trembling. Through the open window she could hear the distant sounds of the city, sirens, car horns, life continuing normally while she sat in the lion's den. "You've lasted longer than the others," he said finally, setting down his pen, his dark eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. "Why?" "I need the job, Mr. Salvatore. Everyone needs a job. That doesn't explain why my son hasn't tried to destroy his room since you arrived." Esperanza's pulse quickened. Perhaps he's just adjusting. "Luca doesn't adjust, he destroys." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her like a predator evaluating prey. "In the past 2 years, he's put 3 maids in the hospital, broken furniture, thrown objects, screaming fits that lasted hours. But with you, nothing, not even a raised voice. Maybe he's getting better. Or maybe you're not who you claim to be." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Esperanza forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain eye contact despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "I don't understand, sir." Dante opened a manila folder on his desk. Esperanza Morales, 26 years old, born in Guadalajara, moved to New York 6 months ago on a work visa, previous employment. Housekeeping for 3 families in Queens. He looked up. Very clean background, almost too clean. "I've never been in trouble with the law." "No, but you have been in trouble with other things." He pulled out a photograph and slid it across the desk. Esperanza's blood turned to ice. It was a newspaper clipping from a Guadalajara paper, 2 years old. The headline read, "Doctor loses license after operating on cartel member's daughter." Her hands clenched involuntarily. "I don't know what this has to do with—" "Dr. Elena Esperanza Morales Vasquez," Dante read from the article. "Neurosurgeon at Hospital Civil. Lost her medical license after performing unauthorized surgery on the daughter of cartel leader Miguel Santos. The operation was successful, but Dr. Morales was accused of treating criminals and had her license revoked. The room spun around her. He knew. Somehow this dangerous man had uncovered the truth she'd spent 2 years trying to bury. "That's not me," she whispered. "Isn't it?" Dante stood and walked around the desk, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "Elena Esperanza Morales Vasquez. You dropped the Elena and the Vasquez when you came to America. Started fresh as just Esperanza Morales, simple maid instead of brilliant surgeon." He stopped directly in front of her chair, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Expensive, masculine, dangerous. "The question is," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "why is a neurosurgeon cleaning my house?" Esperanza's mind raced. Deny everything? Run. Tell him the truth about Luca and pray he didn't kill her for the deception. "I needed work," she said finally. "My medical license is gone. This was all I could find." Bullshit. The word cracked like a whip. A surgeon doesn't become a maid because she needs work. She becomes a maid because she's running from something, or someone. He was right, of course. After the scandal in Guadalajara, after the death threats from rival cartels who saw her as a traitor for treating Santos's daughter, she'd had no choice but to disappear. Elena Morales Vasquez had died in a car accident, at least according to the forged documents that had cost her life savings. "What do you want from me?" she asked. The truth. Dante returned to his desk, but remained standing. "Why are you really here?" The honest answer would get her killed, but looking at the painting of Luca's mother, thinking of the little boy downstairs, slowly dying while his father counted money, she made a choice that would change everything. "Your son is sick and," she said quietly. Dante's expression didn't change, but she saw his knuckles whiten as his hands clenched. "Luca has been evaluated by the best pediatric psychiatrists in New York. He has selective mutism due to trauma. Nothing more." "No!" Esperanza stood, her fear transforming into professional urgency. "He has a brain tumor, left temporal lobe approximately 2 centimeters, pressing against his speech center. That's why he stopped talking. That's why he draws those spiraling patterns. His brain is trying to map the pressure." The silence that followed was deafening. Dante's face had gone completely white, his dark eyes blazing with something between fury and terror. "You're lying." "I'm not." She pulled out her phone, showing him photos she'd secretly taken of Luca's drawings. "These aren't random spirals. They're anatomically correct representations of neural pathways. No 7-year-old draws like this unless they're feeling it inside their own head." "Get out." His voice was deadly quiet. "Mr. Salvatore, please listen. Get out!" The roar shook the windows. In one fluid motion, he swept everything off his desk, sending papers and a crystal paperweight crashing to the floor. "You think you can come into my house, lie to me, spy on my son, and then he's going to die?" The words exploded from her chest. "In 6 months, maybe less, that tumor will kill him, and all the money and power in the world won't save him if you don't act now." Dante went perfectly still. When he spoke again, his voice was barely human. "If you're lying to me about this, if you're playing some kind of game." "I'm not playing anything." Tears she'd been holding back for days finally spilled over. "I lost my license trying to save a little girl just like Luca. I gave up everything, my career, my life, my identity, because I couldn't stand by and watch a child die. Do you really think I'd lie about something like this?" For a moment, the mask slipped completely. She saw past the dangerous Mafia boss to the terrified father underneath, the man who'd already lost his wife and couldn't bear to lose his son. Then the moment passed, and the cold stranger returned. "Prove it," he said. "What?" "If you're really a neurosurgeon, prove it. Examine him. Show me this tumor you claim to see." Esperanza's heart hammered against her ribs. "I can't. I don't have the proper equipment, and if I'm caught practicing without a license, you're already caught." His smile was sharp as a blade. "The question is whether you're a liar or a doctor. We'll find out tonight." At 2 a.m., the Salvatore mansion felt like a mausoleum. Esperanza crept through the darkened hallways, her medical bag clutched against her chest like a shield. Every shadow seemed to hide threats. Every creak of the old wood floors sounded like gunshots in the silence. She found Dante waiting outside Luca's room, his imposing figure silhouetted against the dim hallway lighting. He'd changed into dark jeans and a black sweater, but somehow looked even more dangerous than he had in his expensive suit. The pointillism rose on his neck seemed to writhe in the shadows. "He's asleep," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of barely controlled emotion. "Good. This will be easier if he doesn't wake up." Esperanza's hands shook as she opened her medical bag, revealing instruments she hadn't touched in 2 years. "I need you to understand, if I'm right about this, if there really is a tumor, then my son is dying and I've been too blind to see it." Dante's jaw clenched. "And if you're wrong?" The unspoken threat hung between them like a blade. They entered Luca's room together, moving like ghosts across the plush carpet. The little boy lay curled on his side, dark hair spread across his pillow, one small hand clutching a pencil even in sleep. His desk was covered with new drawings, more spirals, more intricate patterns that made Esperanza's heart ache. "I need light," she whispered. Dante positioned himself to block the lamplight from Luca's face, while Esperanza knelt beside the bed. Her hands trembled as she assembled the ophthalmoscope, muscle memory guiding her through motions she'd performed thousands of times. "What are you looking for?" Dante's voice was barely audible. "Papilledema, swelling of the optic nerve caused by increased intracranial pressure." She gently lifted Luca's eyelid, praying he wouldn't wake. "If there's a tumor pressing against his brain." The view through the ophthalmoscope made her stomach drop. Luca's optic nerve was severely swollen, the edges blurred and elevated. Classic signs of dangerous pressure building inside his skull. "Mierda," she breathed in Spanish. "What? What do you see?" Esperanza sat back on her heels, her worst fears confirmed. He needs surgery. Soon. The pressure in his skull is already affecting his vision, and if it continues to build... How soon? Dante's voice cracked slightly. Weeks. Maybe a month if we're lucky. She began packing her instruments with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Dante finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "How long have you known?" "I suspected from the first day. The way he held his head, the obsessive drawing patterns, the selective mutism starting exactly when a tumor would begin affecting his speech center." She looked up at him, seeing a father's anguish written across his dangerous features. "I confirmed it tonight. And you said nothing. What was I supposed to say? Hello, Mr. Salvatore. I'm actually a neurosurgeon in hiding. And by the way, your son has a brain tumor." Tears she'd been fighting spilled over. "You would have killed me." "I still might." But there was no heat in the threat, only exhaustion. Luca stirred in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Both adults froze until he settled again, his breathing deep and even. "Can you save him?" Dante asked finally. The question she'd been dreading. "I don't know. The tumor's location is extremely delicate. One wrong move and he could lose his ability to speak permanently, or worse. And even if the surgery goes perfectly, I can't perform it legally. I have no license, no hospital privileges, no... I don't care about legal." Dante's eyes blazed with desperate intensity. "I care about my son. Can you save him?" Esperanza closed her eyes, remembering another little girl, another desperate father, another impossible surgery. "I tried this once before, in Guadalajara. The daughter of Miguel Santos had a similar tumor. I operated in secret outside the hospital system." "Did she survive?" "Yes. The surgery was successful, but the scandal destroyed my career, my life. I lost everything." "And you'd risk losing everything again? For Luca?" The question hung in the air between them. Esperanza looked at the sleeping child, so small and vulnerable, his artistic hands still clutching the pencil that had been trying to tell them he was dying. "Yes," she whispered, "but I can't do it alone. I'd need equipment, a sterile environment, assistance, blood on standby. And if something goes wrong..." "It won't go wrong." Dante's voice carried absolute conviction. "You'll save him." "You don't understand the risks." "No, you don't understand." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "I've already lost his mother. I won't lose him too. Whatever you need, wherever you need to do this, I'll make it happen." "Dante." The use of his first name slipped out before she could stop it. "This isn't like ordering a hit or intimidating a rival. This is brain surgery on a 7-year-old child. If I make one mistake, one tiny error in judgment, then you'll live with it. But if you don't try, if you let him die because you're afraid..." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with controlled strength. "I'll make sure you live with that too." The threat should have terrified her. Instead, she saw it for what it was, a father's desperation wrapped in the only language he knew how to speak. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Even if the surgery is successful, even if I remove the tumor completely, there's no guarantee he'll start speaking again. The trauma of losing his mother, combined with months of neurological pressure. The psychological damage might be permanent. But he'll be alive." "Yes, he'll be alive." Dante released her wrist and stepped back. His decision made. "Then we do it, whatever it takes. I'll need time to plan, to gather supplies." "How much time?" Esperanza looked at Luca again, calculating tumor growth rates and pressure build-up. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're lucky." "You have 1 week. That's not enough." "It's what we have." Dante's voice brooked no argument. "Every day we wait is another day that thing grows inside his head. 1 week." As they prepared to leave the room, Luca stirred again. This time his eyes fluttered open, dark and confused in the lamplight. He looked at his father, then at Esperanza, his gaze lingering on the medical bag in her hands. "Papa?" The word was barely a whisper, the first sound he'd made in 2 years. Dante's breath caught. "Luca?" But the little boy's eyes had already closed again, leaving them wondering if they'd imagined the miracle of his voice. In the hallway, Dante turned to her one final time. "If you're lying about any of this, if this is some elaborate It's not. Good. Because if my son dies, you die with him. And if you try to run..." His smile was sharp as winter. "I'll find you. No matter where you go, no matter how well you hide, I'll find you." Esperanza met his gaze steadily. "I'm not running. Not this time." As she walked back to her room, one thought echoed in her mind. In 7 days, she would either save Luca Salvatore's life or watch him die. And either way, nothing would ever be the same. 6 days later, the abandoned warehouse in Queens had been transformed into something resembling an operating theater. Dante's connections had produced medical equipment that would make most hospitals jealous. Surgical lights, monitors, anesthesia machines, everything Esperanza had requested and more. The space was sterile white now, a stark contrast to the blood-soaked world that had paid for it. Esperanza stood at the scrub sink, methodically washing her hands for the 3rd time. Through the glass partition, she could see Luca on the operating table, small and fragile under the bright lights. Dante sat beside him, holding his son's hand and speaking in soft Italian. "Ti amo, bambino mio," he whispered. "I love you, my little boy. Everything will be okay." The anesthesiologist, a disgraced doctor Dante had found through his network, finished his preparations. "He's ready, Doctor." "Doctor." The title felt foreign on her tongue after 2 years of hiding. But as she entered the operating room, muscle memory took over. This was who she was meant to be, regardless of the circumstances that had brought her here. "Scalpel," she said to the nurse, another of Dante's acquisitions. The blade felt perfect in her hand, an extension of her will. She made the first incision with steady precision, opening a window into Luca's skull. Everything else faded away. The warehouse, the danger, the man watching her every move. There was only the surgery, the delicate dance between life and death. "There," she breathed, locating the tumor through the microscope. "I can see it." The mass was exactly where she'd predicted, a dark shadow pressing against healthy brain tissue. But it was larger than the scans had suggested, its tendrils reaching deeper into Luca's temporal lobe. "How bad?" Dante's voice came from behind her, tight with controlled fear. "It's operable, but complex. The tumor has grown around several critical areas. I'll need to be very careful not to damage his speech center further." For the next 4 hours, Esperanza worked with painstaking precision. Each cut had to be perfect, each movement calculated to preserve the delicate neural pathways that made Luca who he was. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air, and her hands never wavered. "Tumor's coming free," she announced, carefully extracting the mass that had been slowly killing the little boy. God, it's beautiful." "Beautiful?" The nurse looked confused. "Clean margins, no invasion into surrounding tissue. If I can remove it completely." Esperanza's voice trailed off as she worked, using microscopic instruments to tease away the last tendrils of diseased tissue. "Got it." She held up the tumor, a grape-sized mass that had caused so much pain. "It's out." The monitors showed strong vital signs. Luca's brain, freed from the pressure that had tormented him for months, began to function normally again. Blood flow improved, swelling decreased. "Is he..." Dante couldn't finish the question. "The surgery was successful. The tumor is completely removed and there's no sign of damage to surrounding tissue." Esperanza began the delicate process of closing, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. "But we won't know about his speech until he wakes up." 2 hours later, as the anesthesia wore off, Luca's eyes fluttered open. He looked around the makeshift recovery room in confusion, his gaze settling on his father's worried face. "Papa?" The word was clear, strong, unmistakably real. Dante's composure cracked completely. Tears he'd been holding back for 2 years spilled over as he gathered his son into his arms. Luca, my boy, you're okay. You're going to be okay. Where are we? Luca's voice was hoarse but functional. This isn't home. It's a special place. The doctor needed to fix something in your head. Luca's eyes found Esperanza, who was cleaning her instruments nearby. You're not really a maid, are you? She smiled through her own tears. No, sweetheart, I'm a doctor, and you're the bravest patient I've ever had. Did you fix the hurt in my head? Yes, the hurt is gone now. Luca nodded solemnly, then looked at his father. Papa, I remember things. About Mama, about the night she... Shh. Dante stroked his son's hair. We'll talk about that later. Right now, you need to rest. But Luca wasn't finished. I remember drawing the man who hurt her, the one with the scar on his chin. Uncle Marco. The name hit the room like a bomb. Dante's face went white, his hands stilling on his son's hair. What did you say? Uncle Marco. He was there that night. He was arguing with Mama about money, about you. And then... Luca's voice trailed off, the memories too painful even for his newly healed mind. Esperanza watched the revelation unfold, understanding finally clicking into place. Marco, Dante's trusted lieutenant, his right-hand man for over a decade. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Luca, Dante said carefully. Are you sure? It was dark. You were scared. I drew his face, Papa, over and over. The scar, his eyes, everything. I couldn't forget. Luca's small hand gripped his father's shirt. He said Mama was going to ruin everything, that she knew too much. The silence that followed was deafening. Esperanza could practically see Dante's mind working, processing the implications, planning his response to this ultimate betrayal. Thank you for telling me, he said finally, his voice deadly calm. Uncle Marco won't hurt anyone ever again. As the sun set over Queens, casting long shadows through the warehouse windows, Esperanza finished her post-operative notes. Luca was stable, his speech returning stronger by the hour, his personality emerging from the fog of pain that had trapped him for so long. Doctor. Dante appeared beside her, his presence as commanding as ever, but somehow softer now. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You don't owe me anything. Saving children is what I do. It's who I am, even when it costs you everything. Esperanza thought about her old life, her medical license, the career she'd sacrificed. Especially then. Dante was quiet for a long moment, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in 2 years. What will you do now? Your visa expires soon, and after this... He gestured around the warehouse. You can't go back to being a maid. I don't know. Maybe it's time to stop running. Or maybe it's time to start over properly this time. Dante turned to face her fully. I have connections, people who can arrange new documentation, a clean slate. You could practice medicine again, legally this time. And in return, no return, just stay. Luca will need follow-up care, and he trusts you. More than that, he loves you. Dante's voice dropped to a whisper. We both do. The confession hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Esperanza looked at this dangerous man, who had trusted her with his most precious treasure, who had risked everything on her word alone. I love you too, she said simply. Both of you. When Dante kissed her, it tasted like redemption and new beginnings, like a future neither of them had dared to hope for. From the recovery bed, Luca's sleepy voice interrupted them. Are you going to be my new mama? Esperanza and Dante looked at each other, then at the little boy who had brought them together through his pain and healing. Would you like that? Esperanza asked. Luca's smile was brighter than all the surgical lights combined. Yes, but can you teach me to draw better? My spirals are getting boring. Laughter filled the warehouse, the sound of a family being born from the ashes of tragedy, held together by love and second chances. Years later. Dr. Esperanza Salvatore stood in the doorway of the children's neurological wing at Mount Sinai Hospital, watching her husband read bedtime stories to young patients. Dante had traded his white dress shirts for scrubs, though he still wore his platinum watch, and the pointillism rose tattoo remained a reminder of who he used to be. The Salvatore Foundation for Pediatric Neurology had become one of the most respected medical charities in New York, funding research and providing free surgeries for children whose families couldn't afford treatment. It was their way of transforming the blood money of the past into something pure and healing. "Mama," Luca's voice echoed down the hallway as he ran toward her, his medical school textbooks clutched under his arm. At 15, he was already showing the same steady hands and compassionate heart that made great surgeons. "Did you see my anatomy exam results?" "Top of your class again," she said, ruffling his dark hair. "Your father's going to be insufferable with pride." "He's already planning my residency," Luca laughed. "Says I should specialize in pediatric neurosurgery. Follow in your footsteps." Esperanza watched Dante finish his story and tuck the last child into bed. The dangerous Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man who understood that true power came from healing rather than hurting. "What do you think?" Luca asked. "Should I become a brain surgeon like you?" She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the lies, the fear, the impossible surgery that had saved not just Luca's life but all of their souls. "I think," she said, pulling her son close, "you should follow your heart. It's never steered our family wrong." Outside, snow began to fall over Manhattan, covering the city in pristine white, a blank canvas for new stories, new hopes, new dreams drawn with steady hands and endless love.